The soft hum of the fridge in the quiet apartment was the only sound that greeted her as Luna stepped inside, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. It had been another long day. Work, errands, the usual routine. But tonight, there was something off. The silence in the hallway felt too thick, too still. As she reached for the door to her apartment, she froze. A soft click echoed in the air, the unmistakable sound of someone unlocking a door nearby. Luna turned quickly, but the hallway was empty. The distant murmur of a neighbor's TV the only indication that anyone else was around. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard that sound before. The apartment building was always quiet at this hour. No one ever came by so late. She stepped into her apartment, locked the door behind her, and tried to shake off the unease creeping up her spine. It was just a coincidence, right? She told herself it was nothing, but deep down, she couldn't escape the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her. Her fingers brushed against the phone in her pocket, and a chilling thought ran through her mind. She had been avoiding contact with her family for months, but somehow, they always seemed to know where she was. Was it possible that they had found her? Or was someone else, someone darker, tracking her every move? The familiar sense of paranoia stirred within her chest, a feeling she thought she'd long escaped after years of keeping to herself. Luna couldn't shake the sensation. Someone was out there, watching her, and it was only a matter of time before they made their move. Luna had always lived a quiet life, one that revolved around routine and solitude. As an accountant, her days were spent buried in numbers, meticulously balancing books and preparing reports. She was good at her job, but good at avoiding people too. She kept to herself, never indulging in after-work drinks or casual chats with her coworkers. There was always an excuse, a reason to retreat into her apartment where she could breathe freely, without the weight of others' expectations. Her neighbors knew her by face, but not by name. She exchanged pleasantries with Mr. Parker, the elderly man next door, when they crossed paths in the hallway. But that was about the extent of their relationship. He often asked if she was okay, but she gave him nothing more than a polite smile and a quick, "I'm fine," before retreating to her space. To everyone else, she was the quiet, distant woman who had no time for anything or anyone. The truth was, Luna's life wasn't always like this. Once, a long time ago, she had been full of hope and dreams, but those had been shattered. After a traumatic incident in high school, she had sworn off relationships, convinced that letting anyone close would only lead to pain. The incident had haunted her for years, an experience so brutal that the thought of trusting anyone, especially men, seemed impossible. The scars, both physical and emotional, remained with her. And so, she had settled into this life of isolation. She'd left her family behind, moved to a new city, and built walls around her heart. Life for Luna was easier this way, quiet, controlled, and distant from the chaos of human connection. But something was changing. The strange occurrences in the building were unsettling, and though she didn't want to admit it, Luna felt the weight of something. Someone getting closer. She couldn't help but feel like her carefully constructed world was about to unravel. Luna had just returned home from work, the weight of the day still lingering in her tired muscles. She slid the key into the lock and turned it, but when she pushed the door open, she froze. The apartment was eerily still, far too quiet. Her heart skipped a beat. There was something different. At first, she couldn't place it. Everything seemed as it should be, her coat hanging in the entryway, the stack of papers on the kitchen counter. But something was off. Then she noticed it. The living room light was on. Luna always turned off the lights when she left. It wasn't a big deal. Maybe she'd forgotten. But as she stepped inside, a cold shiver ran down her spine when she saw her purse, which she was sure she had left on the coffee table, now placed neatly on the couch. Had she moved it? She didn't remember doing so. Her pulse quickened as she walked to the window. The blinds were closed, but there was something strange about them. The edges, which she always adjusted just so, were pulled down too far, more than usual. Someone had been in here. She felt it in her bones. A chill spread across her skin as she tried to rationalize it. Could it have been the cleaning service? Maybe a friend had stopped by, though she hadn't given anyone the key. But no, she was sure she locked the door. Then, her phone buzzed. Luna picked it up, her hands shaking. There was a text message from an unknown number. "I see you." The words sent a jolt of panic through her grip tightening on the phone. Who was this? She stared at the screen, but there was no other message, no clue as to who could have sent it. She was about to lock the phone and breathe a sigh of relief when there was a knock at the door. Startled, Luna slowly approached. She peered through the peephole and saw Mr. Parker, her elderly neighbor. His face was creased with concern, and for the first time, his usual friendliness seemed tinged with something else. Something darker. "Luna," he said softly as soon as she opened the door. "You've been hearing things, haven't you? I've been hearing strange noises in the hallway lately. Maybe it's nothing, but you should be careful." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, the weight of the tension in his voice made Luna uneasy. She tried to brush it off, offering a nervous smile. "It's probably just the building settling," she said, her voice wavering. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. The next few days were a blur of unease. Luna tried to focus on her work, but it was difficult to shake the feeling that she was being watched. It was subtle at first, like when you feel the hairs on the back of your neck stand up for no reason. She would glance over her shoulder and see nothing, but the sensation lingered. It wasn't paranoia, was it? Then came the footsteps. She had stepped out of her apartment to grab a cup of coffee one morning, and she could have sworn she heard someone behind her, walking just a few steps too close. When she spun around, there was no one. The hallway was empty. Still, the sense of being followed weighed on her. Back in her apartment, the feeling persisted. Luna's unease grew with each passing day. She began to notice more things that didn't quite add up. A photo she hadn't remembered leaving out was now resting on her bedside table. The front door, which she'd always locked securely, had a small, almost imperceptible scratch across the frame. She couldn't remember it being there. Had she forgotten? Or had someone been tampering with it? One evening, as she came home from work, Luna's heart nearly stopped when she saw the kitchen window slightly ajar, the blinds swaying ever so slightly in the breeze. She never opened it. Panic flooded her chest. She scanned the apartment, looking for any signs of intrusion, anything that would confirm her growing suspicion. But nothing seemed out of place, at least, not obviously. Her anxiety was reaching its peak when a message from the same unknown number flashed across her screen. "I'm closer than you think." Her breath caught in her throat. Who was this? Why did they keep watching her? As she sat in the living room, trying to piece everything together, the knock at the door came again. This time, Luna didn't want to answer. But it was Mr. Parker, standing there, his face even graver than before. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You need to be careful. Something's not right in this building. People aren't who they seem." Luna felt a chill run down her spine. Could it be? Could Mr. Parker, the harmless old man next door, know something she didn't? He had always been friendly, but now his words seemed cryptic, tinged with concern, or maybe guilt. Her suspicions were growing, and she could no longer deny it. Someone was in her life, watching her, controlling her reality. She felt as though her own apartment was turning against her, the walls closing in. The question now was, who was behind it all? And why? The line between what was real and what she imagined was blurring. Every creak of the floorboards, every unfamiliar sound in the hallways, felt like a sign that the nightmare was only just beginning. Luna's suspicion grew every day, but nothing concrete had surfaced until the night she made a chilling discovery. It was late, the kind of late where the silence in the building was almost suffocating. She was getting ready for bed when she noticed something strange on the floor beside her bed. A small black object. She hadn't seen it before. At first she thought it was a piece of dust or a hairpin, but as she bent down to pick it up, her heart skipped a beat. It was a tiny, sleek camera, a hidden surveillance device. Luna's breath caught in her throat. It was so small, so discreet. She couldn't believe it. How had it ended up here? She had never seen it before, and yet the undeniable reality hit her like a slap in the face. Someone had been watching her, recording her every move. A rush of panic flooded her chest as she stood up, suddenly aware of the myriad of moments she couldn't explain. The odd sensation of being followed, the strange noises, the messages. It was all starting to make sense. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had been spying on her for days, maybe longer. But who? And why? Her hands trembled as she inspected the camera. It was still on, a tiny red light blinking faintly in the dim room. She turned it off, hoping that it might somehow reveal something. An address, a clue, something that could point to the person behind the invasion of her privacy. When she removed the small card from the camera, her pulse raced. The card was full of footage. Luna's fingers were shaking as she slid the card into her laptop. The images on the screen made her blood run cold. There were clips of her walking through her apartment, clips of her sleeping, of her simply existing in her space. Each video seemed to be captured at random times, but it was clear. Someone had been watching her for weeks, maybe longer. But what made the discovery even more horrifying was the last set of footage. In one clip, she saw a shadowy figure, dressed in all black, moving toward the camera. The figure reached out, adjusting the lens to focus directly on her face. It was the moment the footage was taken from within her apartment. Her stomach churned. The figure, who was it? The person looked vaguely familiar, but Luna couldn't place them. The realization hit her like a wrecking ball. Someone she knew had been in her home. Someone close to her. The next logical conclusion, no matter how absurd it seemed, was impossible to ignore. She had to consider the unthinkable. Could it be her own mother? Her stomach twisted at the idea. Luna's heart was racing now, a sickening sense of dread overwhelming her. Her mother had always been controlling, suffocating, but this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Luna couldn't keep the flood of questions at bay any longer. The discovery of the hidden camera, the strange behavior, the cryptic messages, it all pointed to someone close to her. The only person she could think of who might have access to her apartment, who might know the ins and outs of her life, was Mr. Parker, her elderly neighbor. The unsettling look in his eyes, the way he'd warned her about the noises in the hall, it all seemed too coincidental now. Her mind was a whirlwind of suspicions as she approached his apartment, her pulse pounding in her ears. As she knocked on the door, she felt the weight of the moment. She was about to confront him, to demand answers, to finally piece together the puzzle. When Mr. Parker opened the door, his frail smile faltered the moment he saw her. His eyes darted nervously, as if he knew what was coming. "Luna," he said, trying to maintain his composure, but his voice was shaky. "What's going on?" Luna didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know what's been happening," she said, her voice steely. "I know you've been watching me." Mr. Parker's eyes widened in shock. He took a step back, as though trying to process her words. What, what are you talking about? Luna didn't hesitate, thrusting the camera into his hands. This. You've been spying on me, haven't you? He looked at it, his face paling. For a brief moment, he looked like a man caught in a lie. But then, he quickly recovered, handing the camera back to her. Luna, he began, but she cut him off, her fear and anger mounting with each passing second. Why? She demanded. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me? Mr. Parker hesitated, his eyes darting around the hallway as if looking for an escape. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. You're imagining things. There's no camera. I don't know how that got there, but it's not mine. I swear his words were vague and contradictory, and Luna's suspicions only grew. His reaction didn't fit. If he was innocent, why was he acting so uncomfortable? Why couldn't he provide a clear explanation? Don't lie to me, Luna shouted. I know you're involved. You've been in this building for years. You know exactly what's going on. What are you hiding? Mr. Parker's face tightened, his mouth opening and closing as if he was trying to say something but couldn't find the words. His eyes flicked to the hallway, and for a moment, Luna thought she saw something. Guilt? Fear? Was he trying to hide something deeper than just spying on her? Luna's pulse hammered in her ears. She had no answers, only more questions. The tension between them was thick, suffocating. She didn't know whether to trust him or run. What if he was hiding something far darker than just watching her? The silence stretched on until he finally muttered, barely audible, "You need to leave." The word sent a chill through Luna's veins. It was clear. Mr. Parker knew more than he was letting on. But how much more? And who else was involved in this nightmare? After the tense confrontation with Mr. Parker, Luna felt more lost than ever. Despite his vague denials and suspicious behavior, something inside her told her the truth was still out of reach. But she couldn't ignore the mounting evidence, the hidden camera, the strange messages, the sense that someone had been orchestrating this whole nightmare from the shadows. It wasn't until a chance encounter with an old friend from her past that everything came crashing down. Luna had been walking home, her thoughts a jumble, when she saw someone standing across the street, someone she hadn't seen in years. Chris, her childhood friend. The sight of him stopped her cold. The memories of their shared past flooded back. Carefree days, long talks, and dreams of the future. She hadn't spoken to him since she left home for college. At first, Luna thought it was a coincidence, but then she noticed something unsettling about the way he was watching her, almost too intensely, like he was waiting for something. Luna, he called out, his voice a mixture of familiarity and tension. We need to talk. She approached him, unsure of what to expect. As they spoke, Luna's mind raced. Chris seemed different, older, more guarded, but it was his next words that made her blood run cold. You're not safe, he said softly. It's not Mr. Parker who's been watching you, Luna. It's me. Luna took a step back, disoriented. What do you mean? What are you talking about? Chris hesitated, then confessed, it was never just about you. This is about your mother. She's been using you, manipulating you from the very beginning. You've been a pawn in a much bigger game. Luna felt the ground beneath her feet give way. Her mother? The woman who had controlled her entire life, who had been the cause of all her pain? But how could she have been involved in something like this? Chris's voice grew more urgent. Your mother wanted to control you, Luna. She knew you were the key to something bigger. That's why she planted the cameras. That's why she used me to manipulate you from the start. She knew you'd start suspecting others and eventually isolate yourself. It was all part of the plan. Luna's mind was spinning. She had always known her mother had some level of control over her. But this? To use her own daughter in a cruel, twisted scheme? The disbelief washed over her in waves. Her chest tightened as she tried to process the truth. Her entire life had been a lie, a carefully constructed trap. Why? She asked, barely able to speak. Why would she do this? Chris lowered his gaze. Your mother's been in debt for years. She's been using you as leverage, Luna. But now, she's in deeper than she's ever been. She needed you to stay close, to never break free, to keep her in control of everything. And I was just the pawn she used to make sure you wouldn't escape. The revelation was a blow that left her breathless. She felt betrayed by everyone, by the one person she thought would always protect her. Now she was faced with an impossible choice. Could she trust Chris, someone from her past, who had been used by her mother to manipulate her? Or did she keep fighting alone, knowing that there was still more to uncover? The truth had shattered everything Luna thought she knew about her life. Her heart raced with fear and anger. She had to make a choice, and fast. The weight of the truth was crushing, but Luna knew she couldn't stay where she was. Her mother's plan was clear now, and it was all falling apart. The stakes were higher than ever. She had to leave before everything spiraled further out of control. Her first instinct was to escape, but as she rushed to her apartment, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Chris. She knows. She's coming for you. Luna froze, panic gripping her. She looked around, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. She had no time to waste. Her mother would stop at nothing to find her, to drag her back into her grasp. Luna quickly bolted for the stairwell, her heart pounding. She didn't know how much time she had, but every second felt like a lifetime. She reached her apartment door, but when she tried to unlock it, her hands trembled. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, familiar, menacing. Her mother's voice rang out in the distance. Luna, you can't escape me. Luna didn't hesitate. She threw open the door and grabbed her essentials. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't be trapped in this place any longer. As she was about to flee, the door slammed open behind her. Her mother stood there, her face twisted in fury, her eyes wild with control. Where do you think you're going? Her mother shouted, stepping into the apartment. Luna's mind raced. She had no plan, no backup, but she had one thing on her side: the element of surprise. She grabbed the nearby fire extinguisher, aiming it at her mother, who flinched, momentarily stunned. Stay back, Luna shouted, her voice shaking but firm. I won't let you control me anymore. Her mother's eyes darkened with fury, but Luna didn't give her a chance to react. She darted for the window, throwing it open and climbing out onto the fire escape. She could hear her mother's frantic cries behind her, but Luna's determination outweighed her fear. She was leaving. She was finally free. Her heart raced as she descended the fire escape, the ground getting closer with every step. When her feet hit the pavement, she didn't look back. She ran as fast as she could, knowing this was her only chance to escape her mother's clutches for good. Luna's breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted down the street, her mind focused on one thing: freedom. There was no turning back now. Luna's life had changed in a matter of hours. The adrenaline from the escape still coursed through her veins as she took a deep breath and dialed the police. After everything that had happened, she felt a sense of disbelief, like she was waking from a nightmare, only to realize it was real. The officers arrived soon after, and her mother was arrested for her role in the stalking and manipulation. The relief of finally being free from her mother's control was overwhelming, but it came with a price. Luna knew her relationship with her family was permanently shattered. She moved into a new apartment, far away from her past, and blocked her mother's number for good. She replaced everything: the phone, the wallet, even the simple objects her mother had given her throughout the years. It was a fresh start, but one burdened with painful memories. Luna couldn't shake the feeling that she would always be looking over her shoulder, even though she was free. She had escaped physically, but her past, her mother's shadow, lingered in the back of her mind. Her interactions with Chris, though helpful during the chaos, became strained. He had been used just as much as she had. But now, Luna was afraid to trust anyone fully. She had learned the hard way how deep manipulation could run, even from someone who claimed to love her. Despite this, Luna felt a subtle shift in herself. She was more cautious now, yes, but she was also stronger. Her fear had transformed into determination, and while her scars would never completely fade, she was ready to reclaim her life on her own terms. Yet even as she found a new sense of freedom, a part of her knew the danger hadn't completely passed. There would always be traces of the past, haunting memories, whispers of control, things that wouldn't easily fade away. And somewhere, deep in her gut, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something or someone was still watching. Weeks passed, and Luna tried to rebuild her life. The haunting memories of her mother's control and manipulation still clung to her, but she was determined to move forward. Every now and then, she would glance out the window of her new apartment, only to catch a fleeting shadow in the corner of her eye. But she brushed it off. She had escaped. She was free. One quiet evening, as she settled in after a long day, her phone buzzed. Luna picked it up, expecting a work notification, but the message sent a chill down her spine. It was from an unknown number. "I know where you are, Luna. Don't think you're truly free. I'm still watching." Her hands froze as her pulse quickened. She stared at the words, the screen of her phone blurring as fear crept up her spine. The number was untraceable, the message too familiar, too personal. It wasn't just a random threat. It was the feeling of someone knowing her secrets, knowing her weaknesses. Luna dropped the phone, her breath shallow and ragged. She stood up and looked around the room, but everything appeared still. Yet the weight of the message lingered like an unseen presence, heavy in the air. In the silence, she thought she heard a faint sound, like a tap on the window. She didn't turn around. Some things, she realized, never truly go away.